predicament exists when the Earth on its present course gets sicker, and the behavioral cure is pretty distasteful. The cure for our civilization's future injuries is so painful, I've hidden it at the end of this video. Not seeing the sicker conditions, no normal person would consider it. Let me expand the common view of civilization's future injuries to include starvation and conflict deaths, loss of tech and civil services, loss of environmental services, entrapment, living like serfs. During the last 300 years, people have risen from living like 17th century serfs to living like moderns. Our population has increased from 600 million to 8 billion. These increases were facilitated by increasing energy deliveries. That is, deliveries from forests and wind only supported 600 million at this lifestyle. Coal supported a billion at this lifestyle. Coal and oil together supported 4 billion at this lifestyle, and coal, oil, gas, and uranium today support 8 billion. Earth's crustal reservoirs supply coal, oil, gas, and uranium, and by the end of this century, they're expected to not produce. Energy deliveries from them are expected to decline and stop. We hope alternative energy deliveries will come online to replace them. However, if they don't, energy deliveries will decrease. Populations and standards of living will decrease. With only forest and wind delivering energy, human population will be 600 million, living like 17th century serfs. Accompanying this decline, humans will experience scarcity, then conflict. Taken together, a self-reinforcing loop called scarcity conflict death spiral will cause most people living this century to suffer tragic deaths. Exhausted crustal resources will trap the remaining survivors in lifestyles of 17th century serfs. What causes deliveries to decline? People live with this infrastructure. Together, these groups create civilization. This civilization exists because it was supported by a huge machine. A machine which produces energy, goods, services, and food. When the machine moves around, it can farm, mine energy, and gather materials. Wherever the machine has been, it leaves a trail of soil that's worn out, mines that have no more ore, and wells that have no more oil. Each year, the machine has fewer and fewer places to go that are not depleted. When there are no more productive areas, the machine is forced to stop. The internal machines, which have no resources, are forced to stop. Deliveries of energy, goods and services, and food are forced to stop. Grocery shelves empty. People burn books to keep warm. They hunt deer for food. They fish to eat. And when there are not enough, they begin to starve to death. They kill each other over the remainders. The population contracts until it equals what the earth can feed without the flow of energy to these machines. What is this number? In 18th century, When farm animals powered farm machineries, the food supply fed 600 million. If flows of energy decrease to 1700 levels, human population in 2100 will again be 600 million. Let's calculate the injuries during the 80 years of population contraction. 8 billion people are living today. 8 billion could be born in the next 80 years. 16 billion people lived during this century. Subtract the 2 billion who died of old age in the next few decades. 14 billion lived and did not die of old age. Now, if in 2100 Earth can feed only 600 million people, this 13.4 billion people must die from either starvation or conflict, fighting over food. That is almost everyone that lives this century. Don't forget to add in the injuries to survivors who, because they have no access to crustal resources, which have been exhausted, have to live like serfs, or they live in a damaged environment, or without technology or rule of law. Who created these injuries? Was it individuals making demands on the machine? If this is correct, avoiding these injuries requires constraints on the instinctual behaviors of 8 billion people. Finding and implementing these constraints is challenging. Only a few people see who is going to get injured and when. Only a few of them can imagine the extreme differences between normal and needed behavior to prevent these injuries, and only a few of them think these behaviors can be implemented. In the next few minutes, I will help you imagine the needed behavior and suggest a way for them to be implemented. Humankind has discovered instinct-driven behaviors that have bad outcomes. They have installed socially enforced constraints, the Ten Commandments, abolition, suffrage, civil rights, the Magna Carta, and the Bill of Rights. However, these constraints don't stop normal requests for goods and services, and they don't prevent production requests. They don't prevent extraction from the crust. They don't prevent people being reduced to serfs. That requires additional restraints. Our culture has created ethical, political, and financial constraints. However, these two do not seem to adequately hold back the machine. Stopping the machine means constraining production demand behaviors. This requires changing the personal demands of 8 billion people and or reducing the number of people. Let's investigate lowering personal demands of individuals, not because I believe it will work, but to help you give up your fantasy that changing what each individual wants can play a meaningful role in stopping the exhaustive consumption of crustal resources this century. For example, living material well-being or limiting the number of children, both are counter to instinct and cultural advice. These suggested limitations seem even more irrational when the motivating injuries, global population die-off, loss of civilization services, loss of environmental services, and entrapment in a dark age are abstractions hidden in the future. Most people are missing a mental tool for making future conditions visible and influential in present behavior selection. They are like the mouse that just does not understand that taking the cheese will get him eaten. One way to make future abstractions visible in the present is to use causal models. Causal models connect civilization's descriptions into a machine that has a crank. And when the crank is turned, the machine pushes civilization's descriptors into their future conditions. In 1972, these people built this causal model that connected civilization's descriptors. When they turned the crank, the model produced this red line. For me, this was the amount of resources remaining in the crust. Full in 1900, 85% full in 1972, empty at the bottom of the graph. Their model also produced this black line, global population, which contained this population die-off. The die-off was 75 years in the future. Given that their modeling technique was in its infancy, they were hesitant to make such long-range predictions. So their report focused on two other variables, which in their model had immediate consequences: food per capita and industrial output per capita. Their model suggested that during the next 50 years, these two variables would stop growing. Thus, the title of their work, Limits to Growth. An economist, Julian Simon, predicted technology and innovation would allow the two variables to continue to grow. When history revealed that these two variables continued to grow, following the two black lines, the model was further discredited, and the model's warning of die-off was lost from view. True, this model predicted future conditions that were wrong in magnitude or wrong in time of occurrence. Let me suggest that their project was undervalued because these errors distracted attention from a correct long-range prediction. Had the model builders limited themselves to this mass descriptor and its relationship to outcome, they might have reported the die-off as the model's most important warning. Had I been a member of the 1972 team, I would have been shown the door for proposing to remove variables and relationships that have to do with dollars, the red ovals, and to keep the variables that have to do with flows of mass and energy, the green ovals. Let me describe the process I used to come to this conclusion and what it means to finding and implementing the constraints on human demands that make civilization viable. The first step requires aggregating elements of reality into a model that contains only flows of mass and energy. Then using the model to determine the behavior that allows safe operation. Let me give an example of the success of this process to define behavior that creates safe controls. Cars are complicated systems, yet from a driver's point of view, they appear simple. Braking stops them, gas pedals make them go, steering keeps them on the road, and not keeping the tank full stops everything. The driver may not know much about the car's complex inner workings. However, she or he knows which behaviors allow transit and prevents accidents. While civilizations are more complicated than cars, there may exist a set of behaviors that keep civilization delivering services and helps them avoid accidents. In the first part of this video, we identified the civilization accidents that we wanted to avoid: global population die-off, loss of civilization services, loss of environmental services, and entrapment in a dark age. We identified the behaviors that cause these accidents, production demands, and the actors that take these behaviors, 8 billion consumers acting as independent agents. The remaining challenge is to identify the constraints that prevent 8 billion sets of demands from producing terrible outcomes. To demonstrate how causal models identify constraints on behavior, I will use flows of mass and energy pushed by machines, held in tanks, pushed through pipes, and controlled by valves. First, the basics of what tanks, pipes, and valves tell us about accidents. Flows emptying tanks cause accidents running out of gas. Flows overfilling tanks cause accidents, CO2 in the atmosphere. Pipes too small to allow flows cause accidents, electrical grid cannot produce power. Closed valves cause accidents, oil embargoes. Open valves cause accidents, nuclear power plant radiation leaks. Flows that increase their own flows cause accidents. Capitalistic economies grow until they hit their limits. Flows that decrease their own flows cause accidents. As the well gets deeper, the pump takes all of the well's produced energy to run itself, and the gas station gets no gas. Let me build a causal model of human civilization using energy and mass flows through machines, tanks, pipes, and valves to help us search for constraints on the behavior of 8 billion people. Let me begin with the simplest mass energy flow model of our civilization. Just one bucket. Let's call it the ecosystem bucket. Sunlight makes the ecosystem produce food. This blue bucket houses global population. This pipe transports food from the eco bucket to feed a global population of hunter and gatherers. These birth machines add people to the bucket, and these death machines subtract them. Each year that the birth machine's production exceeds the death machine's production, the population grows. When births equal deaths from old age, starvation, and conflict, the population stops growing. It stops growing at 100 million hunter-gatherers because that is all the food that can pass through this pipe. When humans domesticated animals and crops and fed them into the production machine, it moved extra food to the blue bucket. This excess food lowers production of the starvation death machine and creates a group of subsistence farmers. The production machine's extra output also opens this valve. This opens a second pipe that delivers mass and energy to the production machine, which opens an extra food pipe into the blue bucket. Each year that the production of birth machines exceeds the production of death machines, the population grows. When births equal deaths, the population growth of subsistence farmers stops. It stops at 600 million because that's all the food the sun can put in the eco bucket to support domesticated animals, plants, and humans. When humankind discovered the Earth's crustal resources bucket, they extracted its minerals and metals and fossil fuels and fed them into new production machines. This increased food flow to the blue bucket, again stopping the starvation machine's production of deaths, and the population grew. Besides feeding more people, this production fueled tractors which opened this valve, which increased flows of mass and energy to the production machine, which increased the flows of food to the blue bucket, which increased population. Each cycle around this loop expanded population until it rose to 8 billion people. All is well, at least until the crustal bucket cannot continue making all of its deliveries. Remember, flows that empty tanks deliver no gas. Remember, when depth increases and it takes all the energy in the pumped oil to run the pumps, no energy remains to run civilization. Without gas delivery, some tractors don't get fuel. Some food does not get produced. Some of the 8 billion don't get fed. Starvation deaths increase, and the 8 billion population decreases. There is more tragedy when the crustal bucket can no longer make deliveries. This scarcity initiates 4 trends inside the population bucket. Tragic deaths go up. Per capita services go down, hierarchy goes up, and exclusion goes up. Perception of these trends opens this valve and diverts production to the conflict machines, which diminishes deliveries and feeds fewer people, which creates more bad trends, which are easier to perceive, which causes more diversion, which again diminishes delivery of food. This loop causes deaths to exceed births each year until the 8 billion declines to 600 million. Why 600 million? These pipes, machines, and valves, fed by the ecosystem bucket, still have working flows. They can continue to support 600 million. These pipes, valves, machines have no flows. They no longer support civilization. The model suggests that without flows from this crustal bucket, contraction will produce global population die-off, loss of civilization services, loss of environmental services, and entrapment in a dark age. Without crustal resources, is the remaining model complete enough that we should use it to choose behavior to prevent injury? Or are the components we left out important? Consider that adding more components into the model might make us vulnerable to the mistakes of the MIT group. They included extra variables which distracted its focus from their most important discovery, population die-off. For example, should the development and implementation of fusion, geothermal, solar, and wind machines be included in our model? Maybe not. If the crustal resources bucket empties before their energy services can be brought online or be maintained after they are brought online, then these models' additions do not change these outcomes. Should we include booster projects to speed up implementation of these new production machines to ensure they come online before the crustal bucket can't deliver? It is possible that implementing these booster projects will divert food from the 8 billion, triggering the loop that produces these outcomes. Attempting to build out fission reactors, including liquid salt thorium, may have the same outcomes. I have left out many machines that divert energy and mass from food production. For example, machines that stop biodiversity loss, carbon capture systems to address climate change, sea barriers to address ocean rise, geoengineering to address ocean acidification, alternative protein creation to address overfishing. The net effect of these extra machines is diverting energy and mass from food production. This increases tragic deaths and decreases per capita support, which when perceived open this valve, tripping the scarcity conflict death spiral and producing the same outcomes. Successfully solving these problems, that is, removing these machines from the model, does not change the outcomes produced when crustal resources are exhausted. Machines that lower fertility do decrease the births, or nuclear annihilation machines do increase deaths. However, removing these machines from the model do not change the outcomes, which are still produced by crustal resource exhaustion. Economics, politics, and religion are machines that distribute what the production machines produce. And when distributions cause bad trends, each triggers the scarcity conflict loop and causes these outcomes. If these distributions of food and services were wonderfully managed and they prevented bad trends, including increasing hierarchy and increasing exclusion, the empty crustal bucket could still create these trends and their bad outcomes. If All of these machines, pipes, and valves are removed from the model. When the crustal bucket empties, this remaining model determines these bad outcomes. Successful prevention behaviors require people to not make any demands on the crustal bucket that diminish its deliveries. Here again is a design of a global civilization that does not make any demands on the crustal bucket. It makes all its mass demands on the eco bucket, and it makes all of its energy demands on the eco bucket in the form of hydroelectric power. Ultimately, the mass energy deliveries of this model support only 50 million people living as middle class Europeans. Also, the transition to this design has to be completed before the crustal bucket is empty, estimated to be 80 years. This means the global population must contract from 8 billion to 50 million this century. This is possible if there are only half a million births globally each year. This means starting today, most people don't have children. People's brains are not wired up to choose no children. And for them to choose not having children, they will have to be coerced. Two forms of coercion do not look promising: fully autocratic coercion, the perfect dictator, or fully grassroots coercion, the perfect social contract. Neither appears powerful enough to change the normal birth choices so they avoid these outcomes. To avoid 13.4 billion people starving to death or dying in conflict this century, or to avoid having our children trapped living like 17th century serfs, we have to discover a third way to coerce 8 billion people to not have children. From this mass flow model, a transition looks impossible. Given our culture's law, ethics, morality, religion, and human rights, coercing people to have no children looks impossible. A puzzle may show how to overcome these cultural limitations. Can you connect 9 dots with 4 straight connected lines? 1, 2, 3, 4. That does not work. 1, 2, 3, 4. That does not work. 1, 2, 3, 4. That does not work. It looks impossible. However, letting the lines extend beyond the box allows a solution. Maybe there are some coercive behaviors we have rejected because they extend beyond the box created by our culture. Imagine a biogenetics student, one of 1,000 such students that already exists today in 1,000 labs. In her lab, in the middle of the night, she discovers a contagious virus that can sterilize 8 billion people. What does it mean if she releases the virus? In 2025, the global population is 8 billion, distributed among 80 age groups: 100 million 1 year olds, 100 million 2 year olds, up to 100 million 80 year olds. With no births, at the end of the first year, 1 year olds would become 2 year olds, and there would be no 1 year olds. The 80 year olds would die of old age. Now there are only 79 groups, or 8 billion minus 100 million. Each successive year, the population would decrease by 100 million. In 80 years, global population would decline to near zero. One might think human presence would end on Earth. Nope. Fortunately, the student at the next bench can make test tube babies at the rate of 500,000 a year. This process will stabilize global population at 50 million in 100 years. This birth strategy places the entire burden for the survival of humankind on the actions of a single biogenetic student. She is faced with a personal yet anonymous choice: put the virus in her pocket and let humankind's path kill almost everyone, or release the virus, sterilizing everyone. She is faced with our starting question: is human civilization sick enough to justify a very distasteful cure? Our challenges are to help her quantify injuries on each path and place value on each path's injuries. This model will help her quantify the injuries on our present path. And this model, which avoids these injuries but inflicts sterilization on 8 billion people, will help her quantify injuries on the sterility path. We will have to ensure her that a transition to the smaller, viable civilization can be made. For example, it is possible for the existing civilization to build out the machines of the new civilization using the remaining crustal resources and those transferable from the present infrastructure. We may have to help her develop the cognitive abilities to compare magnitudes of injuries that exist only as abstractions predicted by the future models. In summary, to prevent humankind's termination from crustal resource exhaustion at the end of this century, our challenge is to ensure that an emerging graduate student has the cognitive ability to see 8 billion sterilizations as smaller injury than 13.4 billion deaths by starvation and conflict, plus injuries from survival entrapment as serfs. When the act of sterilizing 8 billion people is no longer inhibited by any cultural decision process, then the act of a single individual becomes humankind's probable path forward.